I'm Ann Cooper. I am currently a professor at Columbia Journalism School, and I'm also the international director here at the Journalism School. We're a graduate program, and 40% of our students actually come from outside the U.S. So we are very globally focused in terms of looking at journalistic practices, press freedom, careers for journalists around the world, and all of that. I have worked for newspapers, for magazines, for radio. I was National Public Radio's correspondent based in Moscow for the last 5 years of the Soviet Union, and then based in Johannesburg, South Africa for 3 years after that, when apartheid was coming to an end and majority rule took over. So I've covered a lot of historic, really momentous, some of them, traumatic events, and some of them incredibly joyous as well.
The question is there were quality media doing the good job. There were cable networks which are heavily criticized, both on sometimes treating Trump as the joke, and later it would be too late to treat something unusual had happened. How would you generally see what has happened with the media, where they failed, where it just can't be any longer just their part of responsibility?
So, the media in America are doing a lot of soul searching this week. Where did we fail? How can we rebuild our political journalism? Lots of questions, lots of, were we too soft? Did we give Donald Trump too much airtime? And sort of on and on, lots and lots of questions. The thing is, there was bad coverage. There were things that, could have been done a lot better. But if you wanted to know the candidates, if you wanted to know their positions, if you wanted to know, about their character, you could find that out very easily. Everything's online now. But so was a lot of other stuff, including, outright lies, about the candidates, about positions that they were taking. And nowadays, people can sort of cherry pick and choose what they want to read, what they want to watch. And so, there's increasingly this tendency to just decide, well, I'm going to read this because it reinforces my view. Even if you're not consciously thinking that, that's what people are attracted to. So I don't think there was a failure of the media in the sense of they simply didn't cover it well. There was a lot of very good coverage, and I could tick off, the Washington Post on Trump and, his charitable giving or non-giving, as they exposed. And a lot of questions that were raised about that. So it was there if you wanted to read it. Perhaps people didn't see it. And even if they did, I think what we're beginning to learn from people who are analyzing the exit polls is a lot of people did read it, did know, and said, you know what, though, I think it's time for change in this country, and Donald Trump is the guy who's talking about big change, turning things upside down. I saw some information about exit polls that said for people who were really concerned about the economy, if you questioned them and they said, yes, the economy was really the most important thing for me, they voted for Hillary Clinton. And the economy is, often the deciding factor in our elections. But for many people, the economy was important, but that change thing turned out to be more important. He's the one who promised, I am really going to kick butts here. I am going to make things very different. And we don't even know what all he's going to do because, much of it has been quite vague. But people were saying, we want change.
Of course, there is a lot of soul searching, trying to find out what we do now. Mm-hmm. But in where we are looking, what way, what direction, because then there is no answer for, the people would go and read what they want.
Look, Journalism is about holding people accountable. That's the most basic function of journalists, is holding politicians, public officials accountable. And, exposing wrongdoing where it happens, and, trying to show people the truth about what is going on, especially with elected leaders. That's what happened during this campaign. There was a lot of journalism, a lot of accountability journalism. There will be, I firmly believe, much more, once we have a new administration in power. And that's clearly journalism's role. It is not, however, journalism's role to tell people how to vote. And that's one of the things that I'm a little troubled by in this conversation. There's this sort of underlying sense of, where did we fail? How did Donald Trump manage to win? It must have been, the fault of the media somehow in their reporting. And I don't really believe that. I believe that there are a number of factors, and one is that, there's so much more media out there now, so many more places that people can go for information, and some of those places are spewing misinformation, some are spewing outright lies, but ultimately, there was a ton of information out there. Much of it was truthful, much of it was hard-hitting, good investigative journalism, and in the end, people made their decision. They voted for the person that they wanted. And it's not our role as journalists to say, look at what we've learned about Donald Trump and his taxes, or his lack of charitable giving, or his behavior of women, and then say, and therefore you should vote for Hillary Clinton. That's not our role. We need to get that information out there, and then people are going to vote the way they want to vote. And what we're hearing in the aftermath is a lot of people saying, yeah, of course, I read about, what he said about women. I read about his behavior with women. I read about, this criticism of him and that criticism of him. But in the end, I chose him because I think we need a change.
And I just don't want to go into this long discussion with endorsement, which is totally ununderstandable in our part of the world. But yeah, it's like it's anyway happening here. But what are the prospects? What do you see? And there is a feeling that, okay, then these, especially print media, would be treated maybe like an opposition media, and it's not their place. And there would be more, as the President Donald Trump would give more favor to Fox, to Breitbart, to kind of his own. Mm-hmm. So what are your concerns? Where we are, what we're expecting?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great concern. What sort of access are journalists going to have to the Trump administration, to the president, to the White House, to, all of the agencies that, that fall under his administration? I think it's safe to predict that journalists will have less access, because that's been the case with every single president in recent memory. Presidential administrations are just becoming more and more secretive about sharing information, making public, information that really is very much in the public interest. We've seen that even with the Obama administration. Many people thought, oh, he'll be a great friend of the media. Well, actually, not so much. So I think, even if Hillary Clinton had been elected, we probably would have seen an increase in that trend toward less access, less information available. The worrisome thing here is, if Donald Trump keeps an enemies list, and by the way, Richard Nixon, who was president decades ago, had an enemies list, and there were a bunch of journalists on it. Donald Trump certainly talks about revenge and holds grudges for a long time. He may well do that with journalists. It's hard to predict. He also has said a lot of things that, seem like campaign rhetoric. We don't really know, how serious he'll he'll be about it. I will say that, he can cut out some of the press if he decides, I don't like what you're doing, I don't like your coverage of me. There are other ways of getting stories. There are tons of people who work in government. There are, lots of people who are committed government employees who are committed to the work of the agencies that they're in, and not necessarily in a partisan way. But, we've always had leakers and whistleblowers and, people who would get information out that, the administration in power didn't necessarily want out. So I don't think that's going to end. I think we're still going to see a lot of good, solid, investigative journalism going on.
And then very short, as the person behind the Committee to Protect Journalism, how do you generally assess the current state of journalism and with all the social media, with all what's happening in the world? How we would shortly explain it, and maybe also would put these kind of elections in the U.S. and what it could be what impact it can have also in the development of the press freedom and vice versa.
Okay, and you're talking about globally?
Like about the world, globally,
yeah. Okay, so first of all, I'm not with CPJ anymore.
Okay.
Well, I think globally in the last few years we've seen a real deterioration of press freedom in many places. Russia being one of them. Ukraine definitely has some press freedom issues. Various parts of Europe, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, you name it. It's a very, very difficult time for journalists. I think journalists are feeling more vulnerable and more under attack than they probably ever have been before. At the same time, there are all these digital tools for getting information out, and in some ways, we are potentially better informed than we ever have been. But on the other hand, there's a lot more stuff out there that you don't really want to pay attention to because it's not accurate, or it's very partisan. And so I think, now I'm talking more about audience than the journalists, but I think it's a lot harder for audiences to figure out what to believe, who to follow, what to read, what TV channel to watch. It's just become a much, much more complicated world for press freedom, for journalists who are trying to continue to report the news independently without being under pressure, because I think they are under pressure. And it's tougher for audiences too.
I'm more hopeful. A lot of people, just very shortly, saying that, there is so much media and people feel the situation is worse than ever. Mm-hmm. Do you share this sentiment?
It kind of depends on what day you ask me. I do get, some people get incredibly worked up about, it's terrible, the mainstream media are losing audiences. So much has been made in this country of all the newspapers that closed foreign bureaus. And to me, that's a very myopic view. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But on the other hand, those bureaus were often just, you had one guy reporting for the Baltimore Sun and somebody for the LA Times, and they were writing more or less the same story. Today, I can go online, and if I've got the language capability or somebody who'll translate for me, I can read what's going on in the media in China, in Russia, in Venezuela, you name it. I can, it's like a smorgasbord of journalism that's available to me. And so that's, I think the loss of this sort of traditional paradigm of the foreign correspondent in this country is, a sad thing, but I think you really have to put it in a much bigger context. We do have more information available to us from many more places, more points of view, more good journalism than we ever had before, when we, could just read our local paper and listen to the local public radio station.